Welcome to this Meet the Author session. Ian, to my right, who I'll introduce, has written Screwed, Britain's Prison Crisis and How to Escape It. And Ian will give a 10-minute introduction to which other speakers will respond, and then we'll have a certain amount of audience discussion. Ian Acheson is Senior Advisor, Counter-Extremism Project, Visiting Professor, School of Law, Policing and Forensic at the University of Staffordshire, and most important for our purposes, author of Screwed, Britain's Prison Crisis and How to Escape It. And then we have Faith Spear, FRSA, who's lead author, the Criminal Justice blog, prison reform advocate, criminal justice system commentator, and a criminologist. Faith will respond first, and then Jonathan John Floyd, who's director of Inside Job, which aims to help people who've left prison thrive and survive. John was involved in the Debating Matters Beyond Bars debating competition, which we did a number of years ago, and have also done more recently at HMP Bronzefield, which is aiming to bring some education and debate into prisons as part of rehabilitation. So without any further ado, I'll ask Ian to kick us off, and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks very much, Geoff. Hi, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Why did I do what I did? About 2016, which is the height of the collapse of the prison service after austerity. And by the way, I speak as a former member of the Conservative Party, and I do think that austerity was one of the most criminally stupid, I use the words advisedly, policies ever invented, which has destroyed the criminal justice system, destroyed the potential of people in prison, and created huge numbers of victims. It's dumb, and 2016 was the kind of height of it. And I read in the papers about a riot at Earlstoke Prison. Probably not many of you have heard of Earlstoke Prison. It's buried in the middle of Wiltshire, just underneath that chalk horse escarpment. Can't remember what it's called. But I was deputy governor there, and then I was put in charge, I think accidentally, for about a year, and that was the kind of high water mark of my prison governorship career. I joined the service in about 1994 as a prison officer in the accelerated promotion scheme that then existed for graduates. But that scheme insisted that you spend a year and a half as a prison officer, and then you went on to spend another year and a half as what was then a principal officer rank, which is the senior uniformed rank in prison service, which is bizarrely separated still between the uniformed class and the governor class in suits, which is not replicated anywhere else in Europe or the world that I know of, and has created a lot of the destruction of the esprit de corps that's necessary for an organisation. Anyway, so I joined about 1994. About 1998, I think I found myself accidentally in charge of this prison on a branch line, which was a Category C prison. It had lifers, it had sort of mixed population, and it was an absolutely brilliant place to work, which is why in 2016, when I heard that it descended into total anarchy and a riot, which happened on a day when 15 uniformed members of staff were looking after 500 frustrated prisoners boiling with rage, banged up for 23 hours stay in their cells because there simply weren't enough staff to look after them or to maintain any semblance of control. I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? So I wrote a book about it. And I'm not actually going to bang on too much about the book. I'm sure my colleagues here to the right will want to talk about that. I just want to end by saying a couple of things. First of all, I'm still optimistic that our decayed and decrepit and violent feral prison system can be salvaged. It will take something to be done about overcrowding. That's absolutely true. And unfortunately, the Labour government were gifted a hospital pass by the outgoing administration, and letting go a whole load of people. It's going to happen next week again. 1,000, 1,500 people are going to be released as part of this emergency mass release tranche. SDS 40, as it's called, where people are released at 40% of their sentence, not because a judge has said that's just or a just desert for the crimes and harm that's been committed, but because of logistics. That's undeniably part of the problem. It is not all of the problem. And very few people are talking about the cultural decay that has contributed to the absolute disaster of our prison system. Why do I say that? Well, pick up virtually any one of Charlie Taylor's, the independent chief inspector of prison, pick up any one of his reports recently, the vast majority of which have been absolutely excoriating about conditions inside prisons. We've got a prison service bureaucracy of over 5,000 people at in Petty France, not far from here, besides St James Park Tube Station. Why does it take the random accident of an independent inspection of places that are not overcrowded? And there's one recently, HMP Manchester, Strangeways, as you know, which was the seat of the last riots, national insurrection in 1990. Why does it take that accident to reveal to the public and apparently the bureaucracy how bad the system is and how useless they have been at supporting frontline staff to deliver prisons with a purpose? And the purpose of prisons, and I'm absolutely unapologetic about that, is firstly punishment. It is retribution. Okay? If it's retribution alone, it's an immoral waste of time that makes people worse and creates more victims. So it should be prisons with a purpose, about retribution and also rehabilitation. People talk about a rehabilitative culture. It's a total fantasy. It does not exist in 90% of our prisons. Why does it not exist? Because there is no order and there is no control and the state is not in charge. And I'm here to tell you this. People misunderstand the idea, the concept of order and control routinely, especially from the progressive arm of the Criminal Justice Commentariat, who will always read into that oppression. If you have terrified staff who are not in charge, okay, nothing else hopeful can happen. That is foundational. Safety, order, control, discipline, predictability, to everything else good that can happen. When I was in charge of security at Wandsworth Prison, just to finish this point, and that was back in the mid-1990s, we were the biggest gang in the prison, the people that wore the uniforms. We were totally in charge. Was it a utopian place? Absolutely not. And there were problems of racism, there were problems of corruption, racism in staff I'm talking about, just to be clear. But we were in charge, so we were able to do things that would give the Daily Mail's leader writers a fit if we were doing them today, because we were able to, for example, have the Pimlico Opera Company going into to Wandsworth to do operas. We were able to, when I was in Dartmoor, okay, get this, in 1999, 2000, we were able to allow a film crew to come into an operational Category B prison and film the escape of two people over the wall at night. It was for a film called Prison Break, which starred James Nesbitt and Timothy Spall. Can you conceive of what the press would do if that was repeated now? We did it with, I'd say, a bit of gulping, but we did it because we were in charge. And because we were in charge, we were able to do hopeful things and take risks, controlled risks, to help people rehabilitate. That film crew, we said, yeah, we'll do that, but you need to talk to our guys about careers in film. You know, what's a best boy, what's a grip, how do you get into this business, all that kind of stuff. So I'm optimistic, even though the book is called Screwed, because the strapline underneath is Britain's prison crisis and how to escape it. We can, if we have resources, we have leadership, we have will, and fundamentally we have a transformation of the corporate centre of the prison service, which has failed just as much as overcrowding has to deliver justice and prisons with a purpose. Thank you.
Faith, would you like to respond?
Well, I have read Ian's book and I thought it would be control, order and hope, which are three things that Ian does talk about a lot. But I do recommend the book. I've read lots of books of people that have worked in prisons, have been inside prison as a prisoner themselves. And I think Ian's is very clear. It's got humour in it, so I do recommend it. And I'm not getting commission on that. So. But I want to start. I'm not a politician. I've never wanted to get involved. I don't like the idea of having to play to someone else's tune and say things I don't believe. For those that know me, they would say, this sounds like something Faith would say, but it wasn't me this time. This was James Timpson, now Lord Timpson, Minister for Prisons, Parole and Probation, talking in an interview with Andy Coulson a couple of years ago. Now, as Prisons Minister, he must have changed his tune. In the same interview, He also said that instead of serving 50% of a sentence in prison, this should be reduced to 25%. I wonder if he's changed his mind about that too. But one thing I have said repeatedly is that we have to stop this madness of believing that we can change people and their behaviour by banging them up in warehouse conditions with little to do, not enough to eat, and sanitation from a previous century. As we know, the prison estate is running out of space. Early release schemes are being implemented by the new government to avoid gridlock in the justice system. And next week, another, 1,000 or so will be released early. Mainstream media frequently reports on prisons in England and Wales that are squalid and fueled by drugs. I've seen it for myself, and I've been writing about it for over 10 years. The lack of rehabilitation, lack of education, lack of purposeful activity, overcrowding, understuffing, gang-related violence. Yet still we build them and still we fill them. In 2016, I was invited to write an article from my experience as a chair of an independent monitoring board in my local prison in Suffolk. I don't know whether you all know, but there's a monitoring board in every prison. The article I wrote was factual, honest, and it challenged the independence of the IMB. Before it went to print in the Prison's Handbook, I received notification that the article had been sent to the Ministry of Justice lawyers. What followed was 9 months of hell. I was bullied, suspended from my role, gagged, and investigated twice by the Ministry of Justice. I was up in front of a disciplinary hearing in Petty France and then dismissed. 2 prison ministers were involved. My crime? I broke the IMB Code of Conduct for speaking out. One of the investigators wrote, "In my view, she breached the Code of Conduct, but as there is no clear IMB Code of Conduct or any reference to the Cabinet Office guidance, this was not entirely Miss Spears' fault. So I broke a Code of Conduct that didn't exist." Even the president of the IMB wanted to rewrite the Constitution template to close a loophole to dissuade others in the IMB to speak out about what was really happening in the prisons. And it's not the last bastion of chauvinism I have come across. The Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, is saying the same things today as I said then. He's paid to say these things. I was dismissed for saying these things. But I've noticed that people harp on about the prisons in Scandinavia. Halden and Bastøy in Norway seem to be the best known, but few seem to know that a prison in England had visitors from Scandinavia looking at their regimes with a view to model some of their best practices. It was called Blantyre House. And in Norway, a resettlement prison was set up based on the principles and methods used at Blantyre. So how was that recognised here? Instead of promoting the good practice, the then Director General of the Prison Service authorised squads of officers, approximately 80, and dogs, led by the Governor of Swaleside Prison, to raid Blantyre House. They trashed it. All prisoners were tested for drugs, yet not a single test proved positive. The whole episode ruined a lot of trust built up between prisoners and staff. The Governor of Blantyre House was unaware of what was about to happen because he was removed hours before. But it was a prison that exceeded all their key performance targets and had the lowest rate of drug abuse of any prison in the UK. So even when something works, they still trash it. So when we read the Ministry of Justice mission statement, the Ministry of Justice is a major government department. At the heart of the justice system, we work to protect and advance the principles of justice. Our vision is to deliver a world-class justice system that works for everyone in society. I just don't believe it, and neither should you.
I suppose I'm here really because I've seen the other side of the door, and I am in a position to validate that, in my experience, everything in this book is actually true. So I'd like to point out a few things that, especially that are true, but also a chapter that I think is really important, and at the same time mention a few bits that I think are missing, such as the great work done by peer support workers, people with lived experience, and charities in the third sector. So the book mentions how conditions were to change after the report on Strange Ways years ago. Well, I did have the enviable position of slopping out in Strange Ways years ago. And then 25 years later, I found myself in H&P Birmingham on A-Wing and was dumbstruck, not just how the conditions had deteriorated, but also the culture. That A-Wing has now been, for want of a better word, condemned and is being refurbished. But the rot had set in long before the Chief Inspector of Prisons stepped in with a damning report. And I did meet some of the characters in the book. I did meet Peter Clark. And the first time I met him, when he left the room, I couldn't help but think that if he'd have left the library through a different door, he would have seen all the windows that were smashed in B-Wing, because they weren't fit for function. So people used to kick them out when they were too hot in the summer, and then they'd freeze in the winter. But I didn't. But the second time they came back, I did point out that there was a puddle of congealed blood that hadn't been moved or cleaned for 2 weeks, and people were walking through it. And and that actually did get a mention in the report. So, yeah, I did speak out eventually. So I personally witnessed all the poor conditions, the drug-induced violence, the self-harming, etc., that Ian mentions, and it is all true. And I can agree that there definitely aren't enough officers to maintain a purposeful regime. Definitely, there's been a failure to resume a normal regime after COVID. Services are compromised. Reports that are supposed to be done face-to-face with prisoners are done by questionnaires, and the prisoners give these questionnaires to other people to fill in. And it's true what he says about education. Peer providers lose the contracts, and at the same time, the staff that failed is two paid across, and the failing provider then goes to another prison, and they sort of swap prisons. What I've noticed seems to be a culture of over-promising in bids to deliver services, only then to under-deliver and then move on. And some of at the moment, we've got huge queues for medication in prisons, and that takes a lot of the officers' times. And there's countless instances of self-harm that take the time as well. And at the moment, it's practically impossible to detox from drugs on a detox wing in one of our prisons. So what can we do? It's clear that Ian would like to go back to the pre-grailing era, where, swap all the bureaucrats and to put boots back on the landing. But we've lost all the experience that those officers had. We've lost it. It'll never come back. We've also recently cancelled the Unlocked scheme, which was where we encouraged postgraduates to come into the service. It's been cancelled. So we're losing both types of experience and the wealth of education. And there is a disconnect between the older officers and the younger officers, which means that younger officers often form friendships with the people that are under their care and therefore open to manipulation. So there is a bit of a crazy situation. But I do want to move on to mention peer support and lived experience, as I say. But first of all, I want to mention the chapter and end to ending it all. Officers and residents will know what Ian's writing about there, because a man is 4 times more likely to take his own life while serving a sentence than beforehand. But what is little known, that the Samaritans have found out that somebody is 6 times more likely to commit suicide after they've finished a sentence. I actually know somebody who completed suicide at the thought of going to prison. So prison does have a devastating impact before, during, and after to the individual. So what do we do? Well, me personally, I see a lot of great work being done by people with peer support. Now, some people, I mentioned this recently, and a clinician jumped up and said she spends half her life unpicking the work that peer support do. And there are, Ian says, there are clinicians in prisons. But if it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, these clinicians hardly ever go to the landings, and you have to book an appointment weeks, maybe months in advance to see these. And the mental health crisis is out of control in these prisons. So if it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, who is going to help that person in crisis? You do need to invest in peer support, and that means empowering people that are serving sentences to help out in their own community. The government is about to do a 5-year plan for mental health. I suggest that they think about training some of the people that are serving sentences, and then they can help people when they come out of prison as well.
1 minute, John.
Oh, sorry. So I haven't even mentioned the charity sector. Austerity is creeping back in. The DPS budget did keep governors back the autonomy to pay for services that they thought they needed. But at the moment, they're pulling. It's in free. So charities that were doing really good work are having to scratch about. They were given crumbs and that, and a lot of money is wasted. In context, the government's spending 540 million on a prison education contract that's not being delivered. 340 million on resettlement services that the National Audit Office says achieve nothing, and 5 billion building new prisons. And that they're removing the crumbs that they throw to the third sector. The third sector does work. Ian mentions a charity, Tempus Novus, that helps people get into employment. I myself work for one, Beating Time. The reoffending rate is 55% in this country, yet people that go through our process, it's 5%. So that should be encouraged, not withdraw the funding when something is obviously working. Lived experience very quickly. I think we need to encourage people that have been through the process to go back and help others. I did get challenged once. I go back in prisons and I got challenged saying, an officer said, I don't think it's right that you should come back. But if I can stop 50 people going back into that environment, is it not so bad that I go in for an afternoon? Prison leavers often have insufficient framework and resources to succeed in the community. We find our staff with lived experience of the criminal justice system have the knowledge, skills and expertise to give the practical and emotional support needed. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank to all the speakers and for their brevity, because we are very limited for time. What I'm going to do is, people have got points or questions, sort of distill it and be succinct, and we'll take a number of points and try and have some interaction.
Hi, sorry, I have not read your book, so I don't know if you've touched on it. I feel like there have been a lot of headlines lately of prison warders, for want of a better word, officers, sorry, thank you, getting into trouble themselves. They're having relationships with the inmates, they're dealing the drugs inside, and they are themselves then going to jail. So are we recruiting the right people to do those jobs? And what is the answer? And sorry, I have another quick thing, if that's okay. And I spoke to Faith yesterday about this. A friend of mine came out of prison earlier this year, and he was involved in the Going Forward into Employment scheme, and he was on day release to get a job. After his release, 6 months later, he still does not have the approvals to work. So why is that not working to get him into the workplace immediately?
I imagine that problems and cultures in prison actually reflect problems and cultures outside prisons. So if you had to allocate funds, how much would you allocate to education and society work for adolescents, presumably? And how much would you allocate to prisons? Does that make sense?
I've seen Claire Fox speaking on her, in the House of Lords, on her YouTube channel, Inside the House of Lords, on the topic of IPP prisoners, and I would love to hear more from this panel.
Thank you.
Question for John, really, about what he said about the education providers effectively failing and just shuttling around prisons, swapping prisons, I think was the phrase he used. Are there successful providers, and couldn't moves fairly quickly be made to put them in overall charge of the programme? And does actually education in prison change behaviour when it works?
Right, I'm going to get the panel to sort of come back briefly on those points, and then we'll see if there's any more. You won't be able to answer every question, but whatever points you want to make. Also, if you want to respond to what...
Sure. Briefly, then recruitment, first of all. Are we recruiting the right people? We might be, but we are treating them so appallingly by useless training and then projecting them into an environment that is terrifying and often out of control. We are creating, a problem which is there's a bucket where we're pouring these young, inexperienced staff into, and there's a massive hole in the bottom of it, which is the lack of support that they are given to be able to do what should be a vocation. I've done a whole pile of things in my life, but if somebody asked me what is the most profound and the best thing you've ever done, I would say be a frontline prison officer. We are throwing these people to the wolves effectively. And don't take my word for it. Look at the prison service's own statistics. The largest number of people who are resigning over the course of the last year of data from being prison officers are those people who have served less than a year. So they're leaving before their probation is finished because they're extremely poorly trained and badly prepared for an environment where they are not cared about and treated effectively as cannon fodder in what should be a vocation. Then they're leaving. Culture, where would you there's a question about resources. Where would you allocate funds? Well, I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I would say where you need to allocate funds based on what I've just said is to the creation of a staff care and welfare service that is worth the name, that is more than a generic employee assistance helpline. Because if you don't have frontline staff, you don't have anything else hopeful that can be done in prisons. And you will continue to have places that are existing on a wing and a prayer because they're so denuded of staff. The staff sickness rate, I talked to James Timpson's predecessor, Ruth Cadbury, who I thought was a very intelligent choice for a prisons minister, but didn't make the cut, obviously, because she didn't have the glamour, I think. And I made it clear to Ruth that Ruth was talking to this was before the election, Rachel Reeves about money and stuff, and the Treasury made it very, very clear there was no more money. And I was saying, but there's a tremendous cost saving to be made here that could be put back into the system if you look after people. And thousands of years of frontline staff are being lost in experience, and hundreds of years are being lost in sickness. If you look after people and keep them in the organisation and nurture them, then you're actually going to build that experience that we desperately need to replicate. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Faith?
The lady over there talked about money, education and prisons. It's almost like verses. Well, there's this school to prison pipeline. I think that if there's more money in education, if there's more money downstream, into families, into young people, we probably won't need the money put into prisons, because prisons are like a black hole. You can pour lots of money at it and you won't see any change. We've got to stop people going into prison. And if education is that, well, I think money should go into education. Talking about the right kind of officers, the right kind of people going into prison. I spoke to one of the cohorts of the Unlocked Grads. That was a scheme where they, some of the top flyers in universities did a 2-year master's course and trained as a prison officer at the same time. When I spoke to one of them, I said, "Oh, do you know where you're going to be working?" "Oh, yeah, we're going to Wandsworth." "Yeah, we're going to Wandsworth." I said, "Have you ever been to Wandsworth?" "Oh, no. I said, "Do you know how violent it can be?" And I was talking about things because I have actually worked in Wandsworth. "Oh, no, that's just the media." So, these are bright individuals, but they didn't really know what they were getting involved in. And the training of a prison officer is a matter of weeks. Compared to Scandinavia, it's like 3 years. We're not training. We're not putting the money into training officers enough, and they don't have the support. They need to be mentored, and then maybe they will stay. When you hear that a lot of officers are leaving and they haven't been there a year or 2 years, they haven't even learnt the craft. Jail crafted, some people say. They haven't even had that chance. I'll leave it at that.
First of all, the question, Claire Fox and IPP, I actually asked her years ago. She actually said to me, "What's the worst thing that you know about in prisons?" And it's IPP sentence. And she asked the question, and God bless her for doing so, because politicians are scared of it. The architect of the IPP scheme has since said he doesn't stand by it anymore. We've stopped doing it, yet we've still got thousands of prisoners without a date of release. When I was sentenced, I got more than I thought I was going to get, but at least I had a date that I knew I was going to get out, and I got some relief from that. I've seen people fall apart 2 weeks before a parole hearing because it comes around every 2 years, and they're long after when they should have been recommended for release, and they just completely, the damage on their mental health is catastrophic. So the politicians are scared of being the first one to say, because somebody might then go out in the community and reoffend. It's a terrible situation. Officers being too young. I was actually speaking to a friend of mine saying, about more officers, and he actually said something quite controversial. He said the more officers there are, the more drugs will get into the system. That's unfair. There are a lot of people that join the service wanting to make a difference. But unfortunately, the service doesn't seem to be able to retain them. And there are some officers that do give the service a bad name, that make a route in. And that's the problem with recruitment. If you're not encouraging the best to come in, you are going to take people that are open for manipulation. You asked about education. It's a problem. It needs to be more dynamic. There needs more energy being put behind it, instead of people, as I say, bidding and over-promising and poorly performing. There's an obsession with English and maths, and if you've got English and maths skills, you don't then tend to go to education because it's too basic. We need to do more vocational skills, and that ties in with the work. They said, the charity I'm involved with, they engage with people while they're still serving the sentences. They prepare them for release. And a little bit different to the government initiative, they go through the gate with them. So they're there for them in the community. So it's a continuity of service. And we know it works. So why aren't we doing more of it? So why aren't more of these millions, and it's a huge amount of money that doesn't get to the third sector charities. Why isn't that repurposed? Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Right, so
Can I just say, well, just very briefly, there's a chapter in the book about IPP, and it is called Welcome to Hell.
thanks. Okay, so we'll take one more round of people who want to speak.
A couple of weeks ago, there was a report on the radio, I think it was Radio 4, and it suggested that the presence of prison gangs were stopping all this kind of rehabilitation work happening. And I wondered how big a problem the whole gang culture is and preventing people from being able to be rehabilitated.
Yeah, thank you. I'll declare an interest. I write for Inside Time newspaper, and that's why I'm here. And I interviewed the Special Advisor on Education from Ofsted last week, and she is absolutely clear. She says she's been doing the job for 18 years, and education now in prison is the worst it's ever been. And she said it's everybody's fault. It's not just there are bad educators. People aren't taken to the classrooms. They don't get out of their cells. They don't get into the room. They don't get educated. They lose interest. They drop out. And it's not only in the prisons, it's also from head office, she said. They've got to be determined to do it. I do not think release on temporary license is used enough. And I'd like to hear whether that should be extended, because that gives people work experience and training by employers, not within the prisons. And what really annoys me, and I can say this, is there's a tremendous scheme in Pentonville run by an officer called Time for Change, which works with the gangs, 18 to 25-year-old young people. And they get a 12-week course run by the prison, and they discuss everything: misogyny, violence, respect, the lot. I've been to a number of their presentations, and they work. They work. And a number of prison officers are involved in that. And what's now been announced, and I have no idea why, is that the Mayor of London and the Ministry of Justice are giving £1.5 million to private companies to run that scheme, identical, in Wormwood Scrubs and Pentonville. So the one that works, and has been working for 8 years, is going to be replaced by private sector. And I have no idea why. If they want to do that, put it in one of the other London prisons on Wormwood Scrubs. Why leave something that works? It's like they're going to try and build on the positive results of that one. And it does work. Because what it is, the one thing I don't agree with Ian about is uniforms. Because a good governor in the suit is a good governor, and a bad governor in the suit is a bad governor. But that's my view. But what I do agree is it's respect. And officers are thrown in. You meet people, they've joined the service. When I was in Pentonville, they'd been there a couple of weeks, they're very keen to do all these good things, and they've gone in a month. Because all they're doing is locking people in cells and taking them out again and trying to get through the day. It's dispiriting.
I do have some relevant experience to subject under discussion, and I recognise everything the panel are talking about. I do believe in terms of staffing, recruitment and retention, I think things are getting really dangerous. And I just wondered what avenues are open to people that are in this room to actually communicate how serious the situation is becoming, and are there any doors that are even half open to communicate that message?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the intervention of one of the latest speakers, because the private finance initiative has been in place for a long time. So what is the private finance initiative? The government gives money to the private sector to build prison in this country. And I find it really weird. They give millions and millions and millions to build prison, not just to prison, but also they privatize the contracting of the staff who work in the prison. Now, as a contractor from the private sector, I want to make money, lots of money. It's a business. And so they keep the wages of these poor people, working class people, on the minimum level, like the minimum wage, while this company make a lots of money. So personally, I'm not surprised by there are lots. I mean, it's very complex, like you have described, but there is something not working. And the Labour government is endorsing this initiative, like the gentleman said. So I think we should take into account this aspect in the discussion.
Several people have said about money spent on training officers. I wonder as a nation whether we need to think about where training monies generally as a society are going. I saw in a national audit report that we have trained over 40,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces through our British facilities, and yet we can't find the money to properly train our prison officers. And there's a bigger debate about where public money is spent, I think.
Okay, so I'll ask the panel to, someone obviously can't answer all those questions, you pick up what you want and also to make your final point. Ian, you want to
Okay, there's so much I'd love to spend time talking about here. These are really good, challenging questions. I just want to mention gangs, I guess. So if you're an 18-year-old, 21-year-old man and you're going into one of our prisons today, I would argue that joining a gang, I don't obviously agree with gang culture in prisons because it's incredibly destructive, but if I was that person going into a place where I'm not sure who is in charge, frankly, and the state has surrendered so much control to organised crime, which is driving a drug economy that has literally got a captive audience, I think it'd be quite a rational decision for me to seek out, for my own personal safety, the biggest gang in the prison. The biggest gang in the prison should be His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, the people in uniform, but it's often the case that it isn't. Therefore, people will cleave to that. It's utterly destructive, of course. And where I'm most interested in the intersection of gangs and security is in relation to what I spend most of my professional life talking about, which is counter-terrorism. So we've got prisons, high-security prisons in this country where territory has been divided up over time and space by ideological gangs. And I'm referring to in the south of the country, specifically to Islamist gangs, who are sucking people into their orbit. And there are several people within those gangs, there are not very many of them, but highly subversive, charismatic offenders who want to radicalize others. And of course, in Whitemoor Prison, one of the prisons where I think this is most prevalent, we came within seconds and millimeters of an Islamist terrorist with a violent offender that he had radicalized, murdering a prison officer, which would have been the first time in living memory in Great Britain it would have happened. And it would have absolutely broken the rule of law. Because if you're a prison officer at Whitemoor Prison and your colleague has been taken hostage to be killed, are you just going to put on a uniform and go into work armed with a stick and a tin of Hurty spray the next morning? If I'm thinking about that, you can be absolutely clear that some of the most unrepentant terrorist offenders in custody are thinking the same thing. So gangs are a very big problem. But I've got loads to say about other stuff here, but I can't. So I'll leave it to the rest to conclude.
Thank you, Ian. Great.
Ray, you picked up on Rottle and education. I had a message on my phone at 2:15 this morning. People don't usually contact me at that time, and it was a lady. She'd read an article that I'd done about prisons make more problems than they solve, and she said that she came out of prison in May after serving 6 years of a 12-year sentence. She didn't go into any detail apart from that. And she said that she's been able to go out on Rottle. She had been able for a whole year before she was released to go to university. And then she's been able to continue that, and she's studying criminology. But she was released homeless, and she was released penniless. So the system isn't joined up, not at all. I mean, if you've got, for example, in Hoseley Bay Prison, which is not far from where I live in Suffolk, it's an open prison, but yet only a very small percentage of people go out and work each day, go out on Rottle. I don't understand why not. They're not engaging with the universities. The university, a few on the doorstep, really. They're not engaging with the universities. They're not engaging with companies and that in the area. And that's what they should do, because people need to be ready for release. They need to be able to be involved in training, being involved in education, so that they've got a better chance of staying out of prison once they are released.
Okay.
Private prisons, why? It's not a business. It's just a crazy concept. Politics, well, the Labour government are behind the early release scheme. You'd think that I'd be happy about that. Most of the pre-release work is done in the last 12 weeks. By releasing people at short notice, it was just a catastrophe, really. One governor's told me that 30% of them are already back. And Rottle does work. Rottle, a slow, getting back into the community slowly, is proven to work. It was stopped once because of a knee-jerk reaction to one or two people absconding. Well, that just shows you how massive decisions are made, very reactionary, but it does work. And I want to leave a few positive points. There's a bit in the book about giving governors autonomy. They're at the coalface. Listen to them, see what their individual prisons need, because all the prisons are different. I met a governor at Dovegate. He showed me round. There's a lack of welders in this country. So he showed me around a welding workshop, and all those lads are going to go ahead and get jobs because they're doing something practical that there's a shortage for. Also, it's a very calm prison because there's a lot of purposeful activity in there, and the staff are seen to stay there a very long time. Some of the staff are there 20, 30 years. So it's a really good example of a working prison. And finally, I'd like to say, somebody said, what should we do about education? Debating behind bars went into H&P Birmingham, a prison that's notorious for riots, stuff like that. And it was a great success. First of all, they had to sort of cajole people to take the stand and debate. But there were 16 candidates. Some of them were given arguments that they didn't believe in, but then they had to get with the concept of arguing somebody else's point of view. And at the end, the audience you could hear a pin drop, well behaved. And at the end, people had changed their mindsets, and it was just a great success. But obviously, once something is successful, the money just disappears and then it doesn't carry on. But I thought that might be, because Geoff, you teed me up for that one before.
Thank you very much, John. Can we thank the panel?